Hi guys, this is Dr. Marva. Hope you're doing great. I was getting a lot of queries from my foreign medical graduate students regarding answers of internal medicine MCQs in the recently conducted exam. Here I am right before you, and I'll be discussing answers to these questions in a very quick and a precise format. Some of the images which are present here may not be an exact replica of what came in the exam. Doesn't matter. I think the concept behind each of those four choices is what that actually matters. So let's get started. As I always say, knowledge is power. So let's knock some sense into this discussion. Starting with the very first question, he has talked about a 30-year-old chap with valvular heart disease and is having fever for last 2 weeks. Now, please appreciate the fact that if you ever read the statement valvular heart disease, fever, you are always going to think in terms of infective endocarditis. And then he has given some examination findings in this patient, which you can notice are very characteristic rod spots. And then you can also notice Janeway lesions on the palms. Now, what is happening is that in the previous FMG exam, they used to keep questions simple. They used to simply ask you about Duke's criteria, but here he's actually given you two images of the findings of infective endocarditis, and then he has gone a step further. What is asked you here is what will be the abdominal examination finding of this particular patient. So you very well know the fact, and I'll just show a snapshot from the medicine app. You can see that in the FMG section in infective endocarditis component, I've highlighted the fact that there would be vegetations or millions and trillions of bacteria growing on the surface of the valve. So all of these bacteria or a large number of these bacteria will be embolizing out of the heart towards the spleen, and you would be having a splenic abscess. And there you have it. If you have a splenic abscess, what will it cause? A enlarged spleen in the patient, and that will contribute to development of splenomegaly. So please remember the answer to this question, which is the infective endocarditis patient, would be a simple abdominal examination finding. And why this is happening is because millions and trillions of bacteria are being pumped by the heart into the systemic circulation. So you would have a splenic abscess, and there you have it. A splenic abscess would contribute to a splenomegaly in the patient. The answer to this question is option number C. Moving ahead, moving to the next question, which was regarding a flatline ECG. A 70-year-old man collapsed in his house, was rushed to the hospital. We are having a ECG in which you can see a agonal rhythm. There can be few QRS complexes, but then it's actually a flat line. And once you have a flat line, we are basically talking about asystole in a patient. And the question was rather, what will be the best intervention for this child? Now, this can happen to anybody, or this can happen in front of you at an international airport. You're standing at the queue and an elderly gentleman in the flight collapses. What would you do? You would obviously give CPR, but here we basically asked what is the basic management of this jab. So you need to restart the heart, you need to kickstart the heart. And what do you give to kickstart the heart? You give adrenaline. So pretty straightforward. The answer to this question is injection of adrenaline 1 milligram IV. Please remember, defibrillation is contraindicated. DC shock is contraindicated. No, we don't give a DC shock in flatline ECG. Though in television serials they show like this only, no, that they're giving DC shock in a flatline ECG. But this life, I mean, actual life is not a television serial. So even in Grey's Anatomy, they will tell you that DC shock is being given to a person with flatline ECG because that's a television serial. In actual reality, we don't give DC shock in a flatline ECG. You need to kickstart the heart, get the heart back to circulating or doing its job again. So you need to stimulate the SA node, and what's going to stimulate the SA node is adrenaline. So you give a 1 milligram shot, that would be diluted, and along with that, the CPR activity would anyway continue. So answer to this question is adrenaline for flatline ECG. And this is a snapshot from the app where I have shown or I have discussed regarding shockable and non-shockable rhythms. Emergency medicine, yeah, at least two lectures for FMG section I would like you to study. That is basic life support and advanced cardiac life support. And they teach you, back at your medical college abroad, they teach you about basic life support and advanced cardiac life support. It's only that the instruction may not be that good. So I would just like you to spend some time and listen to BLS and ACLS protocol, and you bang on spot for solving these straightforward questions. And you can see a snapshot from the app where I have discussed regarding a flatline ECG. I've talked about adrenaline being given in a flatline ECG in a person that is asystole, and then the function of adrenaline is to convert the flatline ECG into ventricular fibrillation. So answer to our question of flatline ECG is adrenaline. We move to the third one. This is a woman who is 60 years of age, and she's presented with weakness in the right arm for 4 hours duration. The weakness has then gradually become lesser, and she's a known case of hypertension. So there is a risk factor, no? There's a risk factor. Hypertension can contribute to CNS events. Hypertension can contribute to cardiac events because hypertension is a silent killer. You can also see that the body mass index of this lady is elevated. So there are two atherosclerotic risk factors in a lady who had a development of sudden onset weakness and then resolved on its own. So this is definitely not stroke. You see, in stroke, the symptoms are not gonna ever resolve. So you can rule that out. Transverse myelitis, how can you rule it out? It's going to present with paralysis of the legs. That's going to be paraplegia. So it's definitely ruled out. So you left with two. Either it's a compressive neuropathy. Sometimes you might sleep over your arm. And when you sleep over your arm, you might feel numbness in your arm. But the point is, when it comes to compressive neuropathy, the moment the compressive neuropathy is relieved, you usually tend to get improvement. Or at the same time, I can put it like this: somebody has a disc prolapse, and then there could be numbness in the arm. So obviously, if a person is having pain or weakness in the arm, I need to think of a local cause that could be disc prolapse. But the way the question is given, the straightforward answer to this question is TIA, a transient ischemic attack. In fact, here you can see image of Dhirubhai Ambani with the richest man in India, with Bill Clinton and his two sons, no, Mukesh and Anil Ambani. Dhirubhai Ambani, he died of stroke. No, he had one in 1986. He survived it due to good medical care, and then in 2002, he was maybe neglecting his health. He unfortunately died because of stroke. So, as they say, money cannot buy health. But then transient ischemic attack is a precursor to development of stroke. So the clinical history that came in the exam was basically in favor of a TIA. Moving to the next question. This talked about a 35-year-old chap. He is recently divorced. There's a stress factor. Is suffering from palpitations, headache, and diaphoretic episodes on recurrent basis. He has visited a psychiatrist multiple times. Now, the bottom line is you can pick up here three things, right? That's the mnemonic that I've discussed in the app. That is PHD, palpitations, headache, diaphoretic episodes. They point towards possibility of a pheochromocytoma. You see, guys, a lot of time, and I've discussed this in the app section, you can see that lots of time pheochromocytoma can mimic anxiety neurosis. So a lot of these patients of pheochromocytoma may actually be on anti-anxiety medications and they will not be having any improvement. And that is what precisely the question was. This was a chap who's definitely having a stress. That's he got divorced recently, but then his symptoms are going beyond the standard anxiety component because he has visited a psychiatrist, he has taken treatment, but there is no improvement. So in these circumstances, what would you do for this chap? You would straight away go in for checking out the catecholamine levels to rule out a pheochromocytoma in the patient. You see, the detailed examination, the detailed discussion of these MCQs would be in the main section in the app. Here, I'm just trying to give you the answers so that at least you can calculate your final scores. So, answer to this question would be based on pheochromocytoma, which is a great masquerader. I mean, this disease can mimic anxiety neurosis. It's lots of time. Even qualified doctors may make a mistake and may misdiagnose pheochromocytoma as anxiety, and then suddenly, boom! This guy has a brain hemorrhage because of the hypertensive crisis. So it's a nasty disease and should be picked up by checking for catecholamines in the urine or metanephrine in the urine. Moving to the next question, this was, I think, a straightforward one. You can see one doctor keeping a hand in the middle and another doctor trying to check for the free fluid in the abdomen. You see, this patient is basically having ascites, and what are we talking about here? So you can easily rule out two options, that is Puddle sign and Hingorani sign, because Puddle sign is for minimal ascites and Hingorani sign is in OBGY for a person having ovarian tumor. So you left between a fluid thrill and shifting dullness. For shifting dullness, you obviously need to shift the patient. No? I mean, you need to turn the patient to one side. So here there is no turning of the patient. So what are you checking for? You're checking for what I've highlighted in the app section. You can see here I'm discussing massive ascites. In massive ascites, there will always be a fluid thrill. The abdominal veins of the superficial veins on the abdomen will be very much visible. So the bottom line is that in massive ascites, you can see the gross abdominal distension in this person would be having a fluid thrill present, and this heralds a bad prognosis because this can contribute to abdominal compartment syndrome. This image-based question, the answer is fluid thrill. Moving to the next one. I have kept snapshots from the app so that you can basically go back to those lectures and listen to those parts. I think that would make you feel more comfortable with why I'm saying that this is an answer to a particular question. Moving to the next one, this is an elderly gentleman with hypertension. So there was another one talking about a hypertensive chap. The BP is fairly high. We are talking about a possible hypertensive emergency. Yes, this man fell in the bathroom. Which of the following statements is correct about this patient? One is start antiplatelet drugs. You see, if somebody will fall down in the bathroom, there's a high possibility of him having a brain hemorrhage. And if a person is having a brain hemorrhage, you will not give antiplatelet drugs. Why? Because they will worsen the bleeding. Platelets are given. Well, platelets are not the treatment for brain hemorrhage. No? reduce the BP to 120 or lesser. This is going to cause worsening of the patient. Why? Because in this case, if you lower the BP to less than 120, the cerebral perfusion pressure will dramatically fall. That will cause a brain infarction, that will contribute to rather killing this person. First he presented with brain hemorrhage and you are causing a brain infarction, the guy will deteriorate. So what are you gonna do? You are definitely gonna treat this person's raised ICT by using a ventriculostomy. You might have to go in for a decompressive hemicraniectomy. So definitely you can rule out the three options, and the correct answer is Putamen is the most common site. I have highlighted this in the app. You can see here when I'm discussing a hypertension topic in FMG section of the app. You can notice the fact that in hypertension part, the bleed occurs in the putamen. So that's where the mortality component comes in, because putamen would be adjacent to the lateral ventricle or the third ventricle, and therefore once the bleed will expand, it will press on the ventricles. It will cause a raised ICT in the person. It will cause posturing in the patient, decorticate, decerebrate, and then, well, you have a coma and the person dies. So brain hemorrhage causes posturing and finally a mortality. The next one was slightly a difficult one. This talked about a 70-year-old man with recurrent episodes of exertional syncope. One, the moment you read about an old man and you think that there is a chest pain occurring, you have to think in terms of possible blockages in the coronary artery of the person. But people who are having blockages in the coronary artery, they usually present to you not with exertional syncope, they usually present to you with chest pain. But in this guy, there are two things given. There's a chest pain, there's an exertional syncope. So what you should keep in your mind is also a valvular lesion. In fact, in geriatric age group, the commonest valvular lesion is aortic stenosis. Now, he has himself told you that this is a case of valvular aortic stenosis and is giving you a radiological finding of this person. So the bottom line is, guys, he's asking you what would you get in a person having valvular aortic stenosis. The first thought process of mine would be aortic stenosis will cause enlargement of the heart. There would be left ventricular hypertrophy. And if you look at this X-ray and then if you look at the options, there was no left ventricular hypertrophy asked. So let's solve it. Option A says dilated aortic root. Now this is what you read with aortic regurgitation. You know, dilated aortic root will cause blood to leak back in the heart, aortic regurgitation. Widening of the aortic knob. This is again a feature. Both A and B are related to each other in a sense that if you are having widening of the aortic knob, only then you would be having a aortic regurgitation. You're left between C and D, that is a widening of the vascular pedicle and the post-stenotic dilatation of the aorta. Now, widening of the vascular pedicle is a feature that you encounter with patients having cardiac tamponade. There is a separate MCQ on cardiac tamponade in the subsequent part of the discussion. You can keep listening to that. The bottom line is in aortic stenosis patients, in a lateral view as well as a AP view, even if you don't know how to read X-ray, doesn't matter. If there's a stenotic lesion, there would be some dilatation also, no? Wherever there's a narrowing, there can be dilatation also. So this is a post-stenotic dilatation of the aorta. And if you look at this X-ray, I'll just come back to the previous image. The bottom line is, you see the right heart border. I've always emphasized this. Right heart border is composed of right atria, superior vena cava, inferior vena cava. You can see in the snapshot in the app describing the heart borders. And in this X-ray, this was slightly a difficult one, very frankly speaking, but you can definitely notice that there is a bulge, and I'll come back to the original image. You can see that there is definitely I would say a prominence in this part which is above the standard location. This bulge which is present is the dilatation of the aorta right after the stenotic valve. So this is where the stenotic valve would be somewhere. This is going to be the left ventricle, which is going to be ejecting blood into the aorta. So since the aortic orifice is narrowed in this case, you are having a post-stenotic dilatation. So the answer to this one would be choice number D. These are the snapshots of the heart borders. Please go through that in the app section, valvular lesions. And even if you don't go through valvular lesions, go through the murmurs part. That would give you a definitive insight. Moving to the next one, he talks about the elderly chronic alcoholic patient. Now, alcoholics, whenever he gives you alcoholic patient, what is he going to ask you? He's either going to ask you cardiac issues, beriberi, wet beriberi, CNS issues, Wernicke's encephalopathy, Korsakoff psychosis, or delirium tremens, or he's going to talk about nutritional deficiencies. So the moment I read this question, my thought process should be crystal clear. Either it's a cardiac issue, is it a CNS issue, is it a nutritional issue? And look at the findings. He's talking about bleeding gums. He's talking about petechia in a patient. So you know the fact that all clotting factors are produced in the liver. Because all clotting factors are produced in the liver, therefore bleeding can occur like this. But when you look at the options, you can notice the fact that there is no mention of standard prothrombin time. You know, normally when we discuss liver, we always study prothrombin time is always elevated in chronic liver disease. So in this question, if you look at the options, I'm ruling out option B, factor 8 SA, because that is for hemophilia, no? Factor 8 assay is ruled out because it is for hemophilia. RBC transcytolase activity is useful for identification of wet beriberi or thiamine deficiency, and this chap is not having bleeding gums due to thiamine deficiency. So two options are ruled out. You're left with two: thrombin time, plasma ascorbate levels. The bottom line is, guys, nutritional deficiencies of vitamin C can definitely occur in alcoholics because we have thiamine deficiency. They could be cardiac lesions, CNS lesions. If it's a vitamin C deficiency, it can contribute to manifestations like these. So what are you gonna do? You're gonna take the blood sample, spin it, and then you can take the square levels. So the answer to this would be plasma ascorbate levels. The bottom line is you can have nutritional deficiencies in alcoholic patient, and instead of asking about thiamine, which he has asked so many times, he has this time decided to ask regarding vitamin C deficiency. Moving to the next one, he talks about, this was slightly a difficult one. I think the surgeon will also talk about it, but let me do my part. He talks about a patient with palpitations. Okay, the heart rate is on the higher side, respiratory rate is fine. So there's definitely some evidence of sympathomimetic stimulation given in the question. Now, what are the conditions that you know about sympathomimetic stimulation? Pheochromocytoma, it could be thyrotoxicosis, and he tells you that his mother has recently expired due to renal cell cancer. Now, the moment you read this word, his mother has died because of renal cell cancer, all of you are aware of the fact that renal cell cancer is related to von Hippel-Lindau syndrome. No? Van Hippel-Lindau syndrome is the one related to chromosome 3, and this can have a genetic basis. So the bottom line is that in this person, there is a possibility of a familial tendency for cancers. You see, the mother has died because of renal cell cancer, and the son of this person, or the daughter of this person, is presented with features of sympathomimetic stimulation. So, well, this is slightly a difficult one. Where did I discuss this in the app? I discussed this in the integrated session. You see, right before the exam, we came out with integrated session between me and Dr. Sparsh, and you can see here, me and Dr. Sparsh, when we have discussed pheochromocytoma, you can see all the syndromes that we have discussed: men, type 2A, type 2B, and von Hippel-Lindau. And von Hippel-Lindau syndrome is one which is associated with renal cell carcinoma as well as pheochromocytoma. So because the mother has died because of renal cell cancer, well, I need to evaluate the son for possibility of pheochromocytoma. So, well, what is the test for pheochromocytoma? So it's a two-step question. I'll put it three steps. First, you need to know the syndrome, VHL. Two, you need to know what is present here. Two things: pheo as well as renal cell cancer, and can occur in different generations. And now you need to solve, how do you identify a pheochromocytoma? So what is the best test, guys? No, it is not catecholamines. It is rather end products of catecholamine metabolism. It is not vinyl mandelic acid. I mean, a lot of chaps answer vinyl mandelic acid, guys. I have explained this so many times. Vinyl mandelic acid is not to be answered for pheochromocytoma. Don't fall in that blunder that your seniors have also done. Vinyl mandelic acid is for neuroblastoma, man. The correct answer for this one is delta. That is going to be a fractionated metanephrine levels. Go to the pheochromocytoma section, listen to it. Listen to it at 2x. And I am telling you why. Because pheochromocytoma is going to stay with you for rest of your life. Any entrance exam you're giving. You sitting for FMG, you sitting for PG entrance exam, you sit for USMLE, any exam you sit, pheo is always asked. So please listen to that at 2x today. Just do justice to your time. Just spend few minutes, and I'm very sure that listening to this data for pheochromocytoma would be very useful. And I agree that this was a difficult question, and we have discussed this in the integrated session. You can see renal cell carcinoma and VHL being discussed. Moving on. Comment on the serological report of this hepatitis B positive patient. You see, the problem is that most of us know how to diagnose acute hepatitis and chronic hepatitis B, and in acute and chronic hepatitis B surface antigen is positive. The key in this question was hepatitis B surface antigen is negative now, because you see, in both acute and chronic hepatitis B, surface antigen is always positive. So you can easily rule out the options, guys. I'll repeat that again. Surface antigen positivity is found in acute hepatitis B. हाईली इन्फेक्शियस पेशेंट, लोली इन्फेक्शियस पेशेंट सभी में पॉजिटिव होता है. क्रॉनिक हेपेटाइटिस बी में भी सरफेस एंटीजन पॉजिटिव होता है. तो इसका आंसर ABC तो होना ही नहीं था. लॉट ऑफ गाइज गॉट कंफ्यूज, क्योंकि सर वो कह रहे हैं कि जी इसमें सिक्योरिटी सिस्टम, विच इज द सिक्योरिटी सिस्टम, एंटीबॉडी इज द सरफेस एंटीजन एंड IgG एंटीबॉडी कोर एंटीजन पॉजिटिव. सो पीपल वर थिंकिंग chronic hepatitis B, but the bottom line is that there are two things positive in this guy. That is the security system, antibody to surface antigen, IgG class of antibody. This is not acute hepatitis B, this is not chronic hepatitis B. This indicates a previous infection. The surface antigen has been cleared off. The correct answer to this is delta. If you go through the treasures of prep ladder, you see, I would suggest you If you are for a medical graduate student and you are preparing for your December exam, the treasures part in our app, I would like you to go through them, and this is the table. And for interpretation of this table, what you guys are gonna say, सर इतना बड़ा टेबल कौन पढ़ेगा? तो भाई मैंने एक्सप्लेनेशन दिया है यार, आप देखो ऐप में जाओ, हेपेटाइटिस बी में आई हैव एक्सप्लेन्ड एक्यूट क्या होता है, क्रॉनिक क्या होता है, रिकवरी फेज क्या होता है, आई हैव डिस्कस दोज एस्पेक्ट्स. So all you need to do is, if you get this table right, no, you have to work out exclusion, because you see, he is trying to see your exclusion skills. The bottom line is fast reading of the question. If you do a fast reading in the first go, guys, your eyes have to be on the screen for all that duration. It's all about mental toughness, it is all about mental strength. I mean, if you can focus on the screen for that long, I can assure you the fact that you can come out with anything, guys. I mean, anybody who can go through a screening exam, you can clear any exam in the world. I mean, you should be proud of it, no? I mean, he's giving a difficult exam. Yes, man, I cleared it right in the first go. That's the attitude that I want you to have. Now for this question, guys, I'm gonna get a lot of queries, and I would have students saying कि sir ये image नहीं था. I agree sir, कोई बात नहीं, image नहीं था. But still there are four options ना. Those options are clear: rheumatoid arthritis, psoriatic, osteoarthritis, scleroderma. Your objective should be that you should know how to differentiate between them, because exam में नहीं कर पाए ना. A lot of you were not able to do it. So let's solve this. I have this guy with me who told me that this was regarding a female patient. There's pain in the joints, there's a rash on the dorsum of the hand. Yeah, a bit of redness in the joints can be noticed, and there is extensive skin induration and skin tightening. Now he said, what is the diagnosis? Now rheumatoid arthritis per se, guys, in rheumatoid arthritis, whenever he will give you an image-based MCQ, you would be definitely able to see rheumatoid nodules. Were there rheumatoid nodules in the exam? Most people said no sir, there were no rheumatoid nodules. And you can see, this is a particular deformities in the hand. You can see in fact, I'll just show you another image so that you can be more comfortable. If you go through the app section, I have discussed regarding swan neck deformity. You compare the swan neck deformity with Boutonniere deformity versus mallet finger. आप देखो तीनों देखने में they might look the same. So you should have the capacity to differentiate. No, I mean, this is easy. Swan neck deformity, nobody is gonna mess around. But then Boutonniere deformity, definitely there can be issues. And Boutonniere deformity versus swan neck can be confused very much with mallet finger. Mallet finger is what Dhoni developed once, when wicket keepers or footballers are the ones who develop it. So well, I don't think so that if they give you an image like this, you should ever mess up. And another advantage, you can still see a rheumatoid nodule. So was there a rheumatoid nodule present? Most people said no sir, we could not see any nodules, so I'm ruling that out. Psoriatic arthritis can be a possibility, because psoriatic arthritis will cause involvement of DIP, and then you would be seeing pitting of the nails. So I'll show you an image now of a person having psoriatic arthritis, where you can notice, I'll just zoom it in, you can notice the pitting of the nails, no? So if you're having a pitting, you are having a bit of rash, because psoriasis will also be having a rash, and you can have deformities in the distal interphalangeal joint. Yes, it can be psoriatic arthritis also. But coming back to the original discussion, in the actual question that came, it mentioned a young female. So you're ruling out osteoarthritis because osteoarthritis occurs in old age. You're ruling out rheumatoid arthritis because there are no rheumatoid nodules, no swan neck, no Boutonniere deformity. I'm open to discussion on this one. Then is psoriatic arthritis, where I just showed you an image. There should be psoriatic lesion. There should be pitting of the nails. None present. The key word in this MCQ, which I think a lot of you missed, was extensive skin induration and skin tightening. And that's a very characteristic feature of scleroderma. Because in these patients, there's gonna be a fibrosis below the skin, so there would be a contracture, and that contracture will contribute to manifestations of scleroderma in the patient. So, well, you would do investigations, no? For scleroderma, we do a topoisomerase antibody, we do anti-centromere antibody. Those are subsequent things. But obviously, this question is subject to debate. I agree to that, and I personally feel that if it's extensive skin induration present with skin tightening, then this should be the answer that should be given. Moving to the next one, he talks about a 40-year-old chap who comes to the OPD with excessive sleepiness and lethargy. On physical examination, clinical features which are shown here are depicted. There is no free food in the abdomen, and liver or spleen are not palpable. Now, when I read this, the first time most guys say, sir, I mean, itna sara big MCQ with 4 lines, it takes the mental balance off. No, guys, you need to keep the focus on. So let's do a quick read again. A 40-year-old chap has come with excessive sleepiness and lethargy, so there is definitely something related to his sensorium. So is it a CNS question? Unlikely, because he is showing jaundice. The moment I read and I correlate a person having jaundice and sleepiness, He could be having a hepatic encephalopathy. So the moment you read the first line of the question and you cast a glance at the image, it gives you an idea something related to liver is there. And at the same time, he mentioned regarding alcohol consumption in a person right in the end. So there you join the dots. A alcoholic chap feeling lethargic for most part of the day because he had damaged his liver. He's having jaundice because his liver damage has decompensated. So what is the presentation, guys? It's a decompensated jaundice. It is a decompensated alcoholic cirrhosis. And what is the second image showing? You can notice, in fact, I have highlighted this in the app. You can see through the discussion. I've highlighted there is clubbing, and that's the image. No, that's the clubbing manifestation. You can see the parrot beak appearance of the nails which is present. At the same time, you can also notice a very particular contracture in the ring finger. This contracture in the ring finger is called as Dupuytren's contracture. You can see that I've discussed these manifestations of cirrhosis in the liver component. So you get compensated cirrhosis, you get decompensated cirrhosis, but the moment jaundice starts coming, the moment you start having varices, you start having caput medusae, it means that the person has gone into decompensation. So this is a straightforward case of alcoholic cirrhosis. For the remaining options, I'll be discussing in the main app a more detailed discussion of this question. Moving to the next one. This lady has presented with complaints of palpitations and weight loss. On examination, there's a sinus tachycardia. The moment you read about palpitations, weight loss, sinus tachycardia, you know that either this is pheochromocytoma or it is thyrotoxicosis. These are the only two things which have to be put in differential diagnosis. Both of them can be having these manifest. Now, pheochromocytoma has already come two times in your exam. Two questions we have already solved. Unlikely the third one will also be pheochromocytoma, and then he's giving a skin lesion. No? On the shin of the person, what is the lesion, man? You can see in the rapid revision part, I have highlighted lesions on the shin. In fact, if you just go through this one slide of RR, I can assure you the fact that in the GI section, two questions can be solved here. One question will come later. This is the exact or possible image that came of a lesion on the shin of an ulcerative colitis patient. That would be a lesion by the name of pyoderma gangrenosum. In the same slide, I have also discussed another lesion on the shin of a diabetic patient. This is necrobiosis lipidoica diabeticorum. Now that's a longish name. I mean, if you read it for the first time, it will obviously give you jitters. I know that. But necrobiosis lipidoica diabeticorum, that's seen in shin of a diabetic patient. And in thyroid disease patient, you can see in Graves' disease patient, you could be having is a orange discoloration of the skin, that is peritoneal myxedema. So the snapshot is from rapid revision here, and you can see that's the lesion that he gave you. The correct answer to this question is beta hyperthyroidism. And even if you don't focus on the image, the clinical features are in favor of hyperthyroidism only. The answer to this question is beta. Moving to the next one. This is post-op day 2. So the surgeon will discuss it. Let me do my part. A routine X-ray was performed. Now the patient is not complaining of any respiratory distress, is comfortable. Bilateral equal air entry is heard. You see, lots of time you might be in a post-op round, you are finding the patient is very, very comfortable, but auscultation findings are also coming out to be normal, but the x-ray is showing a nasty finding. You can see a black area where there are no vascular shadows. So this guy is definitely having a small pneumothorax. Now, why did he have a small pneumothorax? That could be a complication that could be occurring because of maybe anesthesia related complications when he was being ventilated artificially following a general anesthesia. So if a person is having a small pneumothorax and there is no distress, what would you do? You would just monitor the patient. So the correct answer would be a wait and watch and a supplemental oxygen. Why would you not put a wide bore needle? Why would you not put in a chest tube? I've explained this in the section in the app. You can see I have described that if it is less than 25% lung collapse, you would just give supplemental oxygen. If it's a 25 to 50% collapse, needle aspiration. And if it's a 50% or more, then you would obviously go in for or central cyanosis, either of the two. Then you will straight away go in for a chest tube. You would be putting an intercostal drainage tube in the patient. That is a chest tube that would be put in the fifth intercostal space in the anterior axillary or mid axillary line in the triangle of safety. So for pneumothorax, guys, we are talking about a person having spontaneous pneumothorax. Spontaneous pneumothorax, the management depends upon the percentage of lung collapse. If it's a small pneumothorax not causing significant manifestations in a person, it is supplemental treatment only. But yes, if the same person is deteriorating, the pneumothorax component has increased in size, there's cyanosis, you will have to put in a chest tube. Answer to this question is alpha. We move to the next one. This person is having chest pain at rest for last 6 hours. ECG was performed and is showing features of myocardial ischemia. I think this was one of the easiest ones. Even the pathologist would have discussed it. I mean, guy with chest pain for 6 hours, myocardial ischemia, biomarkers are showing these derangements. So we are definitely discussing MI, and you very well know the fact that myocyte necrosis will cause LDH1 values to increase. So I think this was a relatively easy one, and even the pathologist would talk about this one. Moving to the next one, a 50-year-old man, he presents with recurrent episodes of chest pain on exercise. Now, the moment you read chest pain on exercise, that you have to think in terms of chronic stable angina. On routine BP monitoring, his blood pressure is found to be elevated, so the risk factor is hypertension. So he's basically combined the two. What is the best drug for management of this chap? That is a chap with hypertension with chronic stable angina. You see, I've highlighted in the app section that for any patient with chronic stable angina with hypertension, the drug of choice is beta blockers. In earlier times in the exam, they simply used to ask, what is the drug of choice for chronic stable angina? And this time, instead of asking you drug of choice, they rather give you a clinical history of a chap with chronic stable angina with a risk factor of hypertension. And if you combine the two, the bottom line is, guys, if a chap is having chronic stable angina hypertension, it's always going to be beta blockers. In fact, pharmacologist has discussed one MCQ on congestive heart failure also. So I just want to highlight the fact that when you are having a combination of, in fact, I'll write it like this. Listen to my words very carefully. Even if you are come here just by chance listening to this video, I want you to pay attention. In a patient of chronic stable angina with hypertension, in a congestive heart failure patient with hypertension, in both of the scenarios, the mortality reducing drug that you would be using would be as follows. If he specifically talks about which drug will reduce mortality in chronic stable angina, your primary answer is beta blockers, that is metoprolol. And if he talks about which drug will significantly reduce mortality in congestive heart failure patient, then please appreciate that in congestive heart failure patient, if it is heart failure with preserved ejection fraction, go through the CHF lecture, and I've talked about aldosterone antagonist and ARNI. ARNI would be aldosterone receptor antagonist, and then would be nephrolysin inhibitors. So please go through these segments in the relevant part of the app, and I'm sure you would be getting a lot of questions on this topic even in your future exams. AA stands for aldosterone antagonist, like spironolactone or eplerenol. Moving on. Coming to the next question, he talks about a 30-year-old man with complaints of fever and breathlessness for 3 days. On examination, the right mammary area, bronchial breathing is heard with normal air entry bilaterally. Please appreciate the fact that in pneumonia patient, air entry is normal. I mean, a lot of guys were saying, sir, answer cannot be pneumonia because air entry is normal. My point is, guys, pneumonia has a normal air entry. You see, pneumonia basically means pus in the airways. So, pus is rather in the alveoli. Pneumonia has pus in the alveoli, so air can still enter into the airway. So air entry is normal. It is bronchial breathing, which is auscultatory finding of pneumonia. Well, this patient's question has been asked earlier also. You can see a very classical Silhout sign, no? The cardiac border, the heart is also wide, lung is also wide. So this is definitely a right middle lobe pneumonia. We'll do a more detailed discussion of ruling out other options in the main section of the app, but please go through this MCQ. There are two differentials of this. One could be hydropneumothorax, and most people were confused of hydropneumothorax because this was relatively a straight line. But why is it not a hydropneumothorax? Because if it's a concomitant hydropneumothorax, there should be blunting of the CP angle. No, here CP angle can definitely be seen. There is no blunting of the CP angle on either sides. Whereas when it comes to hydropneumothorax, you would have blunting of the CP angle. So because in this question, one, hydropneumothorax auscultatory findings would be different from one given in the question. The auscultatory findings are telling you it is pneumonia. Even if you don't know the auscultatory findings, okay. If you look at this X-ray, you cannot answer it a hydropneumothorax because water, when it will go down, air will rise. The water, when it will go down, it will cause blunting of the CP angle. Man, the CP angle will be obliterated. There would be complete whiteness, but in this case, CP angle is still visualized. But this definitely indicates a right middle lobe pneumonia in the person. The next question talks about impression from a chest X-ray. So students told me that they could see an image of a device. From this device, you can see wires. I'll just trace out the wires. One is going to the atria, okay, and the second wire is going into the ventricles of the patient. So there are two wires from an electronic device. So what is it doing? It is controlling the heart rate. So what is it? It is the pacemaker, right? So this is a pacemaker, it could be a ICD, that is a implantable cardioverter defibrillator. But the bottom line is this device, which would be deployed in the left side of the chest where there would be a visible scar in the chest of the person, is mainly for treatment of bradyarrhythmias. Moving to the next question, he talks about prophylactic CNS radiation is given for which of the following cancers. Now this question is slightly a difficult one. This is from the exam section part where I've discussed the exact question. I agree this is a difficult one. You see, guys, prophylactic cranioradiation is given two times. One is in children and second time in adults. And when do you give prophylactic cranioradiation in children? For blood cancer, ALL. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia has tendency to go to the brain. It shows metastasis, it shows CNS leukemia. So to treat the CNS leukemia component, you need to give radiation. So remember, if this question is repeated again and it gives you a pediatric case where you need to go in for prophylactic CNS radiation, you do it for blood cancer. But in case it's gonna be adult, then it is small cell lung cancer. So please remember the fact, prophylactic cranioradiation is given for small cell cancer. The exact question has been replicated. You can go through. This was a difficult one. In fact, this question was discussed in the JIPMER exam. So I agree. I mean, this is not done. I mean, MCI should not be putting up questions like these. But then one or two like these should not affect your equilibrium. You see, most guys got busted by those longer questions, whereas those longer questions were always having a key point, and these relatively smaller ones are the ones which are I am personally scared of the smaller ones. The longer ones I'm still able to solve, maybe because I have a habit of seeing multiple findings in a question from a very young age. Like the way I was trained as a doctor, we had to go through those long case based scenarios. So that's the need of the hour. Okay, moving to the next one. An elderly gentleman fell in the bathroom in early morning hours and was rushed to the casualty. And then he's talking about a low GCS and a CT head. Now, most guys were very worried about the CT head finding. Definitely, there's a midline shift present. You can see that the CNS bleed is contributing to displacement of the ventricles of the patient. But guys, even if this is black and this is white, why this is black and white? Because the patient is having rather, I would say, a hyperdensity initially, but then some part of the blood would be reabsorbed also. You see, in this image, which I would say is not very particular, it can contribute to a difficulty in diagnosis. But then look at this aspect which I've highlighted in the app. Whenever you read about elderly person falling in the bathroom, what are you going to think about? You're always going to think about subdural hemorrhage. To solve this question on the basis of, let me say, radiological interpretation might be difficult for you, but I can assure you the fact that if you ever read this person, elderly person, obese person, Parkinsonism patient, Alzheimer disease person falling in the bathroom, the impact of the head hitting the ground will contribute to subdural hemorrhage in a patient. It will contribute to a concavo-convex hyperdensity. That's the kind of a concavo-convex hyperdensity which is present in this particular case. But I just want to highlight the fact that even if you can't pick it up, or even if the image was not exactly like this, guys, there was a midline shift. That much I know. No, my TND batch guys are very brilliant chaps. They told me regarding this fact, sir, midline shift था और बंदा गिर गया बाथरूम में, तो डायग्नोसिस क्या होगा? सबड्यूरल हैमरेज होगा. तो सर जी, इस क्वेश्चन को सॉल्व करने के लिए ना फर्स्ट लाइन से ही क्रैक हो जाता है क्वेश्चन. So a lot of these questions are having pointers. That is what I'm trying to tell you. Those pointers are the ones which are to be cracked. Moving to the next one. Now even the surgeon will talk about it, but let me just solve it for you. This talks about a young woman who on cold temperature or emotional stress is having these episodes. You can see the finger colors changing from white to blue to red. In the previous years in the exam, they simply used to ask, what does it indicate? It indicates Raynaud's phenomenon. This time also he put up a question, but rather than simply giving an image and saying comment on the diagnosis, he put up a four-liner history, which is useless. The moment I read it, I know it's a Raynaud's phenomenon. Now, is it primary, is it secondary? The bottom line is that when it comes to primary, it is idiopathic. If it is secondary, that means there should be some connective tissue disorder. He has written here, no, there is no underlying illness, there is no comorbidity in the patient. If there is no underlying illness, there is no comorbidity in the person, it cannot be a secondary, it would be a primary Raynaud's phenomenon. So answer to this question is alpha. Harlequin sign is, guys, what you see with the pediatrics, and Ainhum is a feature in Balian love. No, in fact, Ainhum is a gangrene of the toes that is seen in Negroes, right? So this is anyway not gangrene, this is Raynaud's phenomenon. So the answer to this question is alpha. Coming to the flow volume curve, I know a lot of you were very perplexed by this question. You can go through the medicine section of the app. You can go to pulmonology and see me discussing flow volume curves. I've discussed flow volume curves for obstructive lung disorder, restrictive lung disorder, intraparenchymal. I've talked about extrathoracic, intrathoracic obstruction. And bottom line was simple, sir. I'll just quickly draw before you. Just keep your eyes on the board. 5 seconds. जो फ्लो वॉल्यूम कर्व होता है उसमें द इंस्पिरेशन पार्ट इज inferior, expiration part is above. Ask this guy to breathe in, then ask this guy to breathe out. Now what happens in asthma or COPD is breathing in is okay, but asthma is a disease of expiration now. So this expiratory part will be concave, this part will be scalloped, this would be a concavity because of prolonged expiration seen in obstructive airway disorder. So what you can see here is a very classical flow volume curve for COPD. When it comes to restrictive lung disorder, अगली बार दे देगा, अगली बार restrictive lung disorder देगा, मैं ड्रॉ करके दिखाता हूँ restrictive lung disorder कैसे दिखेगा, इसको just follow करना. Restrictive lung disorder, the curve will start a little towards, let me say this is left, this is right. So this will start slightly on the left, the lung volumes will be reduced, and then you will notice a beanie cap appearance. This part will be very pointed. In patients having interstitial lung disease, there is a shift of the curve. We will always give you a baseline curve. जो dotted वाला है वो baseline curve है. So if you get a curve shift, if the curve is given, this is normal. If it gives you a curve which is slightly shifted towards left, it has a very pointed beanie cap appearance. As compared to normal, which is more curved, it will have a proper pointed beanie curve appearance in interstitial lung disease. You want to listen to this, more details of this, you can go to the main section in the app where I've discussed flow volume curve. But this, I think, was a piece of cake, guys. You can very well see COPD, why it's the answer, because there's a scalloping, there's a concavity present. Moving to the next question. This was a lady presenting for a routine antenatal checkup, which blood gas abnormalities expected to be present. I mean, you see, guys, a lot of guys were very worried. Sir, they are mixing medicine with OBGY. Man, this is no mixing. This is straightforward data. You all know that in pregnancy, the oxygen demand of the mother will go up. So what will happen? She will hyperventilate. Respiratory rate would be higher. If there is a respiratory rate higher, what will it cause? Carbon dioxide washout. And if there is a carbon dioxide washout, what will happen? Less production of protons. You know this reaction right from your biology days. Not even I'm talking about medical school days. You know this reaction. No? Carbon dioxide, water, carbonic acid, protons, and bicarbonate. So see what happens. Just look at this. No, carbon dioxide is becoming lesser, so protons will also be lesser. So there would be a alkalosis. A lady having hyperventilation and having less protons, because physiological finding of pregnancy is hyperventilation. So this would be respiratory alkalosis developing in a patient. This is discussed in the ABG section. You can go through the electrolytes component, or I would suggest you to go through two lectures in the PGME section. Two must know lectures. If you're sitting for December 2020 FMG exam, two lectures to be listened from the PGME section are ABG simplified. I have made it very simple, very crisp, and very to the point. There are two lectures on arterial blood gas analysis. You would understand very basic data for it, and I've just put a snapshot from there. I've described respiratory alkalosis, respiratory acidosis, metabolic alkalosis, and metabolic acidosis. The bottom line is hyperventilation causes carbon dioxide washout. Less carbon dioxide causes less protons, so respiratory alkalosis. In status asthmaticus, there's a buildup of carbon dioxide, so there's a respiratory acidosis, and there are various permutation combinations which can be remembered. Like if in the same MCQ in 2020 December he says pregnant lady with hyperemesis gravidarum, she's puking all the time, then there would be metabolic alkalosis. So just go through these abnormalities. I mean, they are, I would say, bread and butter for any physician, and that is why they put it up in the exam. The next question is slightly integrated in a sense that it is with physiology. No, he's talking about rabies virus. The dog bit him on the arm, but the virus will spread retrogradely to the spinal cord and then obviously to the brain. So rabies virus is spreading to central nervous system. It is spreading to the peripheral nervous system, or even tetanus. The toxin goes to I would say the peripheral nervous system, causing rigidity. So he's rather asking you that which molecular motor is used. So all if you're aware of retrograde molecular motor and antigrade molecular motor. No, in the axons the antigrade is kinesin and the retrograde is dynein. So the answer to this is right before you. But this was, I think, instead of just saying retrograde axonal transport as a physiologist would have taught you, they decided to ask it in this particular fashion. Moving to the next question, he talks about this car driver. He's involved in an accident. He's brought to the ER with breathlessness. On physical examination, he's having tachycardia with a low BP. That's the cause of concern. Maybe he's bleeding inside. Body temperature is fine, but extensive bruising is noticed on the chest, and a bedside X-ray was performed, and you can definitely see the fractures. So you very well know that you're dealing with a case of flail chest. So in earlier years in MCA exam, he simply used to ask you what is the best management of flail chest, which is positive pressure ventilation. But in this time, he decided to give you a clinical history. That's it. But the moment you read about a car crash, the moment you read about injuries to the chest, the moment you see multiple fractures, you know what are you gonna do? This guy will have hypoventilation. Hypoventilation will cause carbon dioxide accumulation in the body. Carbon dioxide accumulation will cause respiratory acidosis, and acidosis can kill this man. So if you want to keep this guy alive, you need to kick out this carbon dioxide. How would you kick out this carbon dioxide? Intubate this guy and then put him on positive pressure ventilation. So the answer to this question is choice number C. Coming to the next question, he talks about this lady with lung cancer having shortness of breath. Now, lung cancer patients can be having pleural effusions, and that can contribute to shortness of breath. On examination, her neck veins are engorged, showing gross elevation of JVP. The moment you read that, you know that the cause is not a pleural effusion. Though I have not commented on the X-ray at the moment he's talking about JVP, you know the fact that he's talking about a cardiac cause of breathlessness in this person. So lung cancer patient having breathlessness, but the problem is not stemming from the lung per se. It's not the cancer which is per se causing a problem. The cancer has caused something to the heart. Now let's read on. He talks about distant heart sounds. Now, where do you read distant heart sounds? You read about distant heart sounds in Beck's triad. And Beck's triad is always going to be a feature of cardiac tamponade. The breath sounds appear reduced on the left side. I mean, that was the point that caused confusion in the minds of students, because if breath sounds are reduced, it could be pleural effusion also. But my point is that there are two features which are talking about cardiac involvement, rather three. What are the three cardiac pointers towards, or rather pointers towards cardiac involvement in this case? Elevated jugular venous pressure, distant heart sounds, and a significantly increased cardiothoracic ratio, because what's happening in this case is fluid outside the heart. You can see that I've described cardiac tamponade with a similar kind of an example. There's fluid accumulation around the heart. This guy of lung cancer is basically having a malignant pericardial effusion. He can be having a pleural effusion also, no doubt about it. But a malignant pericardial effusion is going to contribute to crushing of the heart. You can see the pressure on the heart will contribute to the development of Beck's triad. And the moment you read about these aspects of muffled heart sounds, elevated JVP, hypotension, and Beck's triad, you are very well bang on spot discussing or knowing the fact that why in this person deterioration is occurring. The correct answer to this question is cardiac tamponade. Congestive heart failure is there is no risk factors for heart failure, so I'm ruling that out. Bilateral pleural effusion, I can see the CP angle, so I'm ruling that out. SVC syndrome, yes, that could be a possibility, but that in SVC syndrome there must be a mass pressing on the heart. SVC syndrome is more common with lung cancer, right? I think that's a different MCQ that you know. Small cell lung cancer causes a superior vena cava syndrome. Even that will cause a elevated JVP in the person. But at this point of time, the main keyword in this question is, and that is what most of my students gave a feedback, heart sounds are distant. The moment you read that, you know about the fact that this is going to be rather a cardiac tamponade, which is pressing on the heart from outside. It's going to crush the heart. It's going to exsanguinate the heart. And therefore, the manifestations of low blood pressure would develop, and this can contribute to death also. The type of shock developing in this patient is called as obstructive shock. You can see the snapshots on the app here for the same. Moving to the next one, our elderly patient with malignancy has developed hematuria, which is with a dipstick, and urine sample is showing a 4 plus proteinuria. Which of the following is a possible diagnosis of the patient? The bottom line is it's an elderly patient, and there is a definitive malignancy, and there is features of nephrotic range proteinuria. So let's join the dots together. A old man with nephrotic syndrome, and is a known case of malignancy also. So, which nephrotic syndrome is associated with malignancy? The correct answer for that would be MGN, membranous glomerulopathy. You can see a snapshot from the app where I've highlighted that membranous glomerulopathy is associated with solid organ tumors, or could be associated with lymphoma, or could be associated with leukemias. In fact, the statement that I've highlighted in membranous glomerulopathy in the nephrotic syndrome part of the lecture is that nephrotic syndrome seen with cancer, nephrotic syndrome seen in old age is MGM. So instead of simply asking you what is the commonest variety of nephrotic syndrome in old age, he decided to give you a old man with a known solid organ tumor and then say that there is a hematuria and a proteinuria. And yes, in patients who are having MGN, it's a mixed picture. It's a mixed picture. You can have a nephrotic and a nephritic. Both presentations could be simultaneously present in a patient. So the question was simply, I would say, deliberately made a clinical in a sense that they put in 2 3 lines. Otherwise, they could have simply put old man nephrotic. What is the cause? Instead of that, they put it in a descriptive fashion. But I think the question was straightforward. The next question talks about this chap who's brought to the ER with loss of consciousness following a road traffic accident. Maybe the surgeon would also like to talk about it. The GCS is low. Person is in coma. MRI head is involved. Now, which is the diagnosis? Subarachnoid hemorrhage. You see, subarachnoid hemorrhage will be showing presence of blood in the sylvian fissure. Where is the sylvian fissure? Sylvian fissure is here. This would be separating the parietal from the temporal lobe. Now, you cannot see any whiteness in the sylvian fissure of this person. I repeat again. Where do you see subarachnoid hemorrhage? You are supposed to see it in the sylvian fissure most of the time. Or you can see blood in this area. That would be the fissure separating the, or this would be a anteriorly present fissure that would be separating the two frontal lobes. So in this question, subarachnoid hemorrhage is ruled out. There is no subdural hemorrhage. You can't see any concavo convexity. You're left with cerebral amyloid angiopathy and diffuse axonal injury. Anytime you are having an MRI head with no gross findings visible, but the person is still in coma, road traffic accident, head injury, and no visible bleeding. Head injury patient in coma. The bottom line is there is a road traffic accident. The person is in coma and the MRI of the person looks apparently normal. I mean, that's the point. Though some people pointed at some white spots which could be incidental calcifications, but MRI that is not showing any gross bleed. It's not EDH, it is not SDH, it is not subarachnoid hemorrhage. That would be diffuse axonal injury. And cerebral amyloid angiopathy, यार ये तो is a cause of brain hemorrhage ना. Cerebral amyloid angiopathy old man में मिलता है. I mean, how would he put up a question of cerebral amyloid angiopathy? He'll talk about an elderly patient, non-diabetic, non-hypertensive. Like a person was brought into a casualty today, is an old man. His son is saying, sir, my father is non-diabetic, non-hypertensive, but he still had a brain hemorrhage. What is the cause? The cause is in old age, the brain blood vessels become weak. Why? Because there is amyloid deposition, protein deposition in the blood vessels that makes it weak. That is cerebral amyloid angiopathy. So CAA, cerebral amyloid angiopathy, is the one that is encountered in old patients who are having no risk factors like diabetes and hypertension and still are having a brain hemorrhage. The correct answer to this would be a diffuse axonal injury. Moving to a question that talks about HV interval in a very peculiar tracing. I mean, the image that is given here can definitely cause jitters, but this is from first year, guys. This is from Genong. This is actually not a question of internal medicine. It's because of integrated. That is why I've discussed it here. But I want to highlight before you that his bundle electrocardiogram was the one that was given. And in his bundle electrocardiogram, there are just 3 points to be remembered. What is to be remembered? PA, AH, and then HV intervals. So let's do a quick recap. I mean, PA, AH, and HV intervals, what do they indicate? We are doing here a quick discussion, so I'll just focus on HV interval. HV interval indicates, H stands for bundle of phase, so it talks about conduction from bundle of phase to the subsequent bundle branches. I'll put it like this. The impulse will start from SA node, travel to the AV node. It does not go through the AV node. No, it goes across the two sides of the AV node, and then you have is a septal activation. So what I'm saying is, guys, the moment the impulse hits the bundle of phase and then goes to the left fascicle and then goes to the right fascicle, first to left and left to right, this is responsible for the HV interval. The impulse, I'll just put markings here. The septal activation occurring and the impulse going to the fascicle is responsible for the HV interval. That is the question. So in the given tracing, the HV interval basically denotes, so it's antegrade conduction from bundle of phase to Purkinje, and antegrade conduction from bundle of phase to bundle branches. You see this second option, which is a close between C and D. Why D is not the answer is because the spread of impulses to the Purkinje fiber is responsible for the QRS complexes. But at the moment the current has not reached the epicardial part of the muscle. It is rather just starting from the bundle of phase and moving to the left and the right fascicle. So that basically indicates a HV interval. The correct answer to this option is C, and delta or option number D would indicate a rather RS complex. You can go through this through Genong. The physiologist will also talk about it, but if you just have an orientation for PAAH and HV, I think you're bang on spot to solve questions on his bundle electrocardiogram. The next question has an anatomy/medicine overlap. 60-year-old chap, homonymous hemianopia with macular sparing. The keyword is macular sparing. Now, the moment you read that, you know the answer, right? This would be occipital cortex. So the bottom line of this discussion is to tell you why I mean, you can just go through the scores so that you can get a better idea regarding how well did you fare in the exam. Moving to the next one, a 60-year-old man is presented with chronic projectile vomiting and significant weight loss. The moment you read that projectile vomiting, you know you're dealing with metabolic alkalosis. We have discussed this in the routine app section. Metabolic alkalosis, how it develops in a person. There is hyperaldosteronism, and hyperaldosteronism will cause urinary loss of potassium and hydrogen. And if you have a urinary loss of potassium and hydrogen, that will cause a metabolic alkalosis definitely, because hydrogen is getting kicked out of the body. The point in this patient was, I'll go back to the options, everybody could pick up hypokalemic, hypochloremic, no issues. But because he's having fluid loss from the body, because this chap is having rather dehydration developing in his body, so there has to be a third electrolyte imbalance, that is sodium is also lesser. So there are three hypos in this chap, that is going to be hypokalemia, hypochloremia, and a hyponatremia developing. And there's a fourth hypo also, which a lot of you did mention, some of you did not mention, so I did not include it. But if you go through the section in the app, I have explained metabolic alkalosis is associated with hypocalcemia. Now how that happens is beyond the scope of this particular video. You need to go to the main video for that. But do remember the fact that metabolic alkalosis के साथ चार hypos होते हैं. कौन कौन से चार hypos होते हैं? पोटेशियम लेस होता है, क्लोराइड लेस होता है, सोडियम लेस होता है, और कैल्शियम भी लेस होता है. और इसमें तो यार उसने प्यूकिंग किया ना, तो ही इज लूजिंग फ्लूइड्स फ्रॉम द बॉडी. एंड वेल, व्हाट फ्लूइड वुड यू गिव फॉर दिस चार्ट? व्हाट इज द फ्लूइड ऑफ चॉइस फॉर मेटाबॉलिक अल्कलोसिस गाइस? Yes. Next time he can give you a question like this. He can describe a chap who's having all these electrolyte imbalances like this, and he might say what fluid will be given for correction. So the fluid for correction for metabolic alkalosis is normal saline. For metabolic acidosis, you know, is ringer lactate. But the bottom line is there are four hypos which are associated with metabolic alkalosis. So please go through this, guys. Electrolyte वाला जो part है ना, इसको चाहे आप PGME से कर लो. And for those of you who are asking me, should I read FMG, should I read PGME? My answer is first go through FMG part. You know, you start a car from first gear, go to second, go to third gear. You straight away can't start the car in third gear. So सीधा PGMA करोगे फायदा नहीं होगा. But you start from the FMG segment, do some topics from PGMA segment. What topic to be done for PGMA segment? Electrolytes. 2 घंटे का lecture है. I assure you the fact, go through the first lecture of kidney section in PGME. but पहले आपको kidney पढ़ना है FMG से, so that you get the basics right. उसके बाद में step 2 है, go through the electrolyte section in the PGME part. You know, आप एक बार कर लोगे 50 hours of FMG part and then about 125 hours of PGME part. मैं सारा तो करने के लिए बोल भी नहीं रहा हूँ, but do the FMG part thoroughly and then do selective topics from the PGME part. I think you are bang on spot, man. Nothing will stop you. The correct answer to this question is alpha. We move to the next one. This is the image I was talking about. A person of ulcerative colitis is having an ulcer on the leg. You see, they always ask you about extra intestinal manifestations of inflammatory bowel disease. Whenever it's gonna be inflammatory bowel disease and there is gonna be ulcer developing, it's gonna talk about pyoderma gangrenosum. You can go through the app section of inflammatory bowel disease, and I have described these manifestations. In fact, two images which I can say directly related to the images that are shown even in the rapid revision part is peritibial myxedema came and pyoderma gangrenosum came. Moving ahead, the surgeon would also like to talk about this question, but I'll do my part. The person is a tourist guide on Mount Everest. You know, there was a discussion in the app on a question from, you know, summit of Mount Everest, though this was a question related to blood gases. But then even this contributes to the fact that why a person is sick, because the higher you go up on Mount Everest, oxygen is lesser, no, and it's biting cold. So there can be two possibilities. One, the guy will always be having respiratory alkalosis. He would be having hypoxia, and because of cold there would be frostbite. I mean, the moment you read about a question about a soldier posted on Siachen glacier or a summit of Mount Everest, what are you thinking about? You are thinking about four things. That is the thought process I want you to always have: respiratory alkalosis, hypoxia, frostbite, high altitude pulmonary edema, and high altitude cerebral edema. I mean, those are the complications that are seen at high altitude. In this question, he described this chap who's a tourist guide on Mount Everest, and when he came down, there were multiple blisters on his foot, so he's developed a frostbite. He's described these blisters are excruciatingly painful. There are erythematous changes. It is tender to touch, obviously. He says which is not going to be useful. So oxygen will definitely improve his mental status. It will improve the oxygenation of the tissues. I mean, after all, I need a better blood supply because there's a definitive vasoconstriction here. So if I give oxygen to this chap, it will definitely improve the local tissue perfusion. So yes, oxygen would be given. Aspirin, well, I want to cut down the inflammation part. I want to cut down the pain component part. So if I am at a peripheral hospital and I don't have, let me say, tramadol, I don't have access to 4-twin-phenergan, I don't have access to opioids for killing the pain, at least I can give aspirin that will cut down the inflammation component and the pain component. Pentoxifylline, guys, what it does, it reduces the viscosity of blood. And when I was discussing this in the Zoom meeting with my prep students, a lot of those guys were saying ki sir, viscosity reduction is done by aspirin. No, aspirin, man, is antiplatelet drug. It is not a agent that reduces viscosity. वो तो, to tell a patient, we say like this, that aspirin blood को पतला करता है. एस्पिरिन ब्लड को पतला नहीं करता है, वो तो एंटी प्लेटलेट ड्रग है. ब्लड को पतला कौन करता है? व्हाट ड्रग रिड्यूसेस विस्कोसिटी ऑफ ब्लड? दैट इज पेंटॉक्सीफाइलिन. सो व्हाट इज द एडवांटेज? इफ यू रिड्यूस द विस्कोसिटी ऑफ ब्लड, व्हाट विल हैपन? द परफ्यूजन टू द डिस्टल टिश्यूज विल improve. And if the perfusion to the tissues will improve, therefore the chances of gangrene this guy will reduce. But there is no role of anti-clotting drugs like warfarin in this chap. So the correct answer to this question is C. We move to the next one. A person presented with back pain, maybe the age of the person was given. I got a feedback that this was again a geriatric age group person with back pain. Now old man presents with back pain ना, तो क्या सोचना क्या है? Disc prolapse. उसके बाद क्या सोचना है? Metastasis from any cancer. And if it's a male, the metastasis will usually be from a prostate cancer, and if it's a female, the metastasis will usually be from breast cancer. And if these are not in the options, then the next cause to be thought of severe backache in any person of geriatric age group is multiple myeloma. You go through the MCI questions of previous years, whenever he's talking about this statement, no, old man with back pain, old man with back pain, it's always gonna be four differential diagnoses. Either it could be disc prolapse due to faulty sitting habits, either it's a metastasis or it's a multiple myeloma. And then you can see punched out lesions. So he's telling you it's multiple myeloma because the punched out lesions, and he's saying what test would be done in this chap. So I can show you a snapshot from the app when I have discussed multiple myeloma. The highlight screening test is electrophoresis. We can either do a serum or a urinary electrophoresis in the patient that will show a monoclonal component or a M spike. The correct answer to this question is delta. And do remember the differentials for low backache in old age. Moving to the next question, he talks about this AIDS positive chap. I mean, repeated question of MCI. AIDS positive truck driver with cryptococcal meningitis. Earlier, he was just saying AIDS positive person with fever, headache, nuchal rigidity, differential diagnosis. Number one is cryptococcal meningitis. This time, he himself told it is cryptococcal meningitis. What is the rapid test? Now, bottom line is, guys, a lot of you answered India Inc. You see, India Inc. It's a negative stain. It's not staining the organism. It is staining the capsule, right? Or it is staining the organism per se is not highlighted. No, even dust particles can look like cryptococcal neoformans. So India Inc. is one, not a rapid test. Second, it is dependent on the skill of the microbiologist. Mess up. You see, if I put it like this, what is rapid test for COVID? We need to go for antigen test, no, or antibody based test, because PCR will take a long time. A report will take time to come. So antigen or antibody test has to be a rapid test. So I'm ruling out India Inc. from the discussion now. I'm ruling out blood culture and CSF culture, that is ruled out. In the actual lecture मैंने आपको क्या बताया? CSF ELISA for cryptococcal antigen ना. सो अब उसने CSF ELISA नहीं दिया ऑप्शन में, तो क्या फर्क पड़ता है? तो ब्लड में कर लेंगे ना, lateral flow assay for cryptococcal antigen. बट द बॉटम लाइन इज, वी जो भी रैपिड टेस्ट होता है, I mean the bottom line is for any rapid test it has to be antigen or antibody based test. So you just have to look for this option, that is it mentioning antigen? Yes. The best test for diagnosis of cryptococcal meningitis, if you ask me, and is given in the textbook, is CSF ELISA for cryptococcal antigen. It is written as CRAG, CRAG, CR बड़ा AG छोटा, cryptococcal CRAG antigen. तो बॉटम लाइन यही है कि इसको एलाइजा से कर लो, इसको लेटेस्ट एग्लूटिनेशन से कर लो, या इसको लैटरल फ्लो एसो से कर लो. वो जो मेथड्स है वो माइक्रोबायोलॉजिस्ट से आप पढ़ सकते हो कि भाई अलग अलग डिफरेंसेस क्या है. फॉर मी एज अ क्लिनिशियन, द एंटीजन टेस्ट और एंटीबॉडी टेस्ट इज अ रैपिड टेस्ट. So that would help me in diagnosis of this chap. And anyway, I mean, cryptococcal meningitis extensively asked. We'll treat this chap with amphoby. The next question talks about this chap who works in a glass factory, a pathology with medicine. Guy works in a glass factory, so I am talking about silicosis, right? And this guy is having progressive shortness of breath. He's predisposed to development of which of the following? So thank God he did not make this question longer and start giving you features of TB. But I think all of you are aware of this fact that silicotics have a predisposition to development of tuberculosis. Silicotics would be having interstitial lung disease, and then the possibility of TB is increased in these patients because the security system is busy fighting that silica dust. The next question talks about this girl who has developed acute ITP, is managed with steroids. You very well know that in acute ITP we have to give steroids. There is a recurrence of low platelet count once the steroids were stopped, and that's a very common finding because this is an autoimmune disorder. The moment you stop the steroids, there might be a small dip. Now you need to know, are there any visible findings of recurrence of bleeding? Is she having gum bleeds? Is she having petechiae? The question mentioned that in current physical examination, there is no petechiae or any physical evidence of bleeding that tells you the fact that platelet count is low but is not life threatening. Guys, life threatening platelet count. Life threatening platelet count is when the values go to less than 10,000. In this question, there is no mention of any platelet count given, but there is no visible bleeding. No. The question says, what is the next line of treatment? Lot of guys answered splenectomy. No, guys, splenectomy is answered when there is a low platelet count with evidence of bleeding. But in this case, acute ITP in children has a good prognosis. There is a self-resolution in most of the cases. This is just a natural course history. If you listen to the ITP discussion, the bottom line is that in acute ITP in children, you will always have a good prognosis. Adults might be having still remissions. For patients of chronic ITP, we go in for splenectomy. For chronic ITP, we go in for splenectomy, but in acute ITP, if a person is having low platelet counts with no evidence of bleeding, there is no need to worry, especially in children, because if the platelet count is, let me say, 80,000, let me make it lower, 40,000, 20,000, still, I'm not worried. Why? Because life-threatening CNS bleeds are usually seen below less than 10,000. So in this case, we will not continue with steroids because anyway, we have discontinued steroids in the patient. So A is ruled out. Splenectomy is treatment for chronic ITP. As I said, this is a case of acute ITP. So this would be answered as wait and a watch with self-resolution as occurs in most cases of acute ITP. And well, if you can go through the Hindi section of ITP part, there I have described the role of Rho immunoglobulin. You know, I've talked about intravenous immunoglobulin, then I've talked about Rho immunoglobulin because traditionally we read about Rho immunoglobulin for a lady who has who's Rh negative. You know, in OBGY you read about Rho immunoglobulin. So for more details of ITP, go to the English section and listen to the ITP part. And usually when they ask you questions in hematology nowadays, one blood cancer, ALL is asked, or AML or CML or CLL, I mean blood cancer, and then in platelets they'll love to ask about ITP because that's the usual presentation that is seen. Coming to the next question, this is pediatrics slash medicine. What is the primary defect in vitamin D resistant rickets? So we are talking about FHVRR are here familial hypophosphatemic vitamin D resistant rickets. There is a defective gene here which is called as FEX gene. Now the problem with this FEX gene is that it causes a rather overactivity of this molecule, that is FGF23, and FGF23 what it causes is phosphate wasting. अब phosphate wasting से क्या होगा, जो bone है, bone की जो strength है ना, वो calcium alone पे dependent नहीं होती है. बोन की जो स्ट्रेंथ होती है वो कैल्शियम हाइड्रोक्सी एपेटाइट और मल्टीपल अदर सॉल्ट्स पर डिपेंड होती है. सो इट्स नॉट ओनली कैल्शियम दैट गिव्स बोन स्ट्रेंथ, इट इज मल्टीपल अदर सॉल्ट्स दैट गिव बोन स्ट्रेंथ. और फॉस्फेट वेस्टिंग हो जाती है तो कैल्शियम हाइड्रोक्सी एपेटाइट की फॉर्मेशन लेसर हो जाती है. आई विल मेक इट सिंपलर. What I'm basically telling you is that in resistant rickets, there's a defective gene that you all know. There is overexpression of a hormone which is antagonist of PTH. Right? PTH क्या करता है? PTH and FGF23, they have slightly different actions from each other. In simple words, I can put it like this, that the major action of FGF23 is phosphate being kicked out. And when phosphate is kicked out, then calcium hydroxyapatite is relatively lesser and the bone becomes relatively weaker. And that is where the deformities would come, like let me say knock knees would come up in the patient, or there could be bow legs occurring in the patient. So the bottom line is in resistant rickets, there is defective FEX gene that contributes to phosphate wasting from the proximal renal tubules. Coming to alcoholics, they love to ask about alcoholics in MCA exam. This is one, again, such a demonstration. 30-year-old alcoholic, he had a drink 48 hours ago. He is currently developed anger rage attacks, so he's becoming violent. He's unable to identify faces of family members, and he can see inanimate objects. Inanimate objects mean non-living. He can see a rock, he can see chair, he can see any object which is non-existent. He's been brought to your ER. What is your diagnosis? Now the bottom line is he stopped drinking 2 days ago, and alcohol withdrawal will contribute usually to delirium tremens. The correct answer to this is alpha, though the psychiatrist may be also giving inputs regarding it. But the bottom line is, why is it not alcoholic hallucinosis? Is because alcoholic hallucinosis will mainly be having auditory hallucinations, and additional features which are given like violence, rage attacks are usually not given in alcoholic hallucinosis. In Korsakoff psychosis, we have confabulation. He becomes a pathological liar. There is no confabulation, no antegrade amnesia given here. In Wernicke's encephalopathy, you anyway know the mnemonic GOA, that is global confusion of thalmoplegia and areflexia. So because none of those features are given in the question, our answer is DT. And for this chap, what would you do? You would be loading this guy with IV lorazepam. You would be giving IV thiamine to this person, and that would definitely help in a quick recovery of this chap if you are managing him properly. The answer to this question is alpha. Moving to the next one. This is a person who's having loose stools 18 times with reduced urine frequency. What will be the correct finding of the person? You see, if a person is having loose stools with reduced urine frequency, it means that the person can go into pre-renal variety of acute kidney injury. Now, the moment you go into pre-renal variety of acute kidney injury, the body will try to conserve fluid and there would be a concentration of urine. If you look at option A, urinary sodium more than 40, this is a feature of salt wasting. If sodium is more in the urine, it means salt wasting. Salt wasting is a feature of damage to the tubular part of the kidney. When you have tubular part of damage to the kidney, it means renal type of renal injury. I repeat that statement again. Option number A is ruled out. Why? Because of the fact that urinary sodium more than 40 is a feature of renal variety of renal failure, like glomerulonephritis. But this chap is having pre-renal variety because blood supply to kidney is lesser. Option number B is kidney biopsy showing glomerular damage. We don't do a kidney biopsy in an acute kidney injury patient. There is no rule of kidney biopsy in a chap with the AKI. Post-renal is ruled out because post-renal is seen with conditions like benign prostatic hyperplasia, or let me say vesicoureteric reflux, or I can say bladder outlet obstruction. So post-renal azotemia is ruled out because this dehydration component is actually a feature of the pre-renal AKI. In fact, I can show you an image here from the app which will make it more clear. I have highlighted hypovolemia as a trigger for pre-renal AKI, and second, I have done a test to demonstrate whether it is pre-renal or renal, and what is the test on urinary sodium. If tubules are damaged, salt will not be absorbed. No, if tubules are damaged, salt will not be absorbed, so high urinary salt will be present. That is why urinary sodium will be increased or more than 40, whereas urinary sodium would be reduced in pre-renal variety because the body will try to get back all the salt to conserve the volume. So whenever it's a pre-renal variety, you have a decreased urinary sodium. When you have a renal variety, you have a high urinary sodium, which rules out option number A, which a lot of you were confused. I would suggest you to go through acute kidney injury topic, AKI. Just go through the stages because there was a pediatric question that I'll discuss subsequently on acute kidney injury in this exam. So two questions on AKI came. One is regarding the variety, and second was regarding the staging. So I'll discuss about the staging part subsequently, but I want you to know regarding the etiology of acute kidney injury and how it manifests in the person. The correct answer to this question would be choice number C, that would be hyperosmolar urine. Coming to the next question, this talks about a 50-year-old lady with hypertension admitted with breathlessness in supine position. So he's talking about orthopnea, and simultaneously this person is having palpitations. So we are definitely thinking in terms of a pulmonary edema component of heart failure in this person. There are congested neck veins, there is a hepatomegaly, and then you can see a pitting edema present. So that's a straightforward one. They simply wanted you to pick up features of congestive heart failure. And CHF examination wise is pretty straightforward as I've discussed in the app. Treatment part, yeah, I definitely wanted to study, and I've highlighted that for management of patients of heart failure with preserved ejection fraction, and that was a question this time. Which drug will reduce mortality? It will be aldosterone antagonists. The second drug that will reduce mortality would be ARNI. And if he talks about heart failure with reduced ejection fraction, even then the first answer would be ARNI in the patient. So do remember about this. And then the agent that lowers mortality, like MI patient has been discharged and he has been diagnosed with hypertension. So even then, the agent that will reduce mortality will be beta blocker, that would be metoprolol in the patient. So do remember these drugs that I've highlighted, and I think this question was relatively a easier one. The next question has an overlap with pediatrics. Let's try to solve it. This boy has presented with multiple episodes of vomiting of blood. On examination, vitals are stable. That's good news. So you don't need to go for any volume resuscitation. Splenomegaly is noticed. So this tells you the fact that this person is definitely having a feature, something in the range of portal hypertension. Why I'm saying portal hypertension is because in a question which is talking about vomiting of blood and splenomegaly, the link is portal hypertension, because only then the esophageal veins will get congested. You see portal vein pressure, 5 to 10 millimeters. Why will it increase if there is a portal hypertension? Only then the manifestations of vomiting of blood can occur, because there would be portosystemic collaterals and the esophageal veins will also become congested and they'll pop off and boom, they burst and the person starts vomiting blood. Now the mother is giving a very interesting history. She says at birth the baby had jaundice and exchange transfusion was done. And how do you do exchange transfusion? Exchange transfusion is done via the umbilical vein catheterization, and umbilical vein joins which vein? Portal vein. So what I'm saying is, because this baby, when this child, 5-year-old boy, when this child was a newborn baby, then because he underwent a exchange transfusion and umbilical vein catheterization, so it can result in a thrombus formation, and the thrombus formation gradually will obstruct the portal vein. So this patient is actually having a portal vein thrombosis. There's a collateral circulation which is ensuring blood supply to the heart, but ultimately this presentation is that of portal vein thrombosis, which has resulted in portal hypertension. Now Budd-Chiari syndrome always presents with the painful hepatomegaly. Budd-Chiari has been discussed in the liver section in the app, you can go through that. Sinusoidal fibrosis is alcoholic fibrosis. Now, child would not be obviously consuming alcohol, so you can rule that out. Non-cirrhotic portal fibrosis is our diagnosis of exclusion. This is the rarest cause of portal hypertension. If you go through the discussion, I mean, if a person is non-alcoholic or viral markers are negative, the rare cause of portal hypertension is NCPF. The correct answer to this question is portal vein fibrosis. Causes of portal hypertension have to be studied, and you can go through the cirrhosis and its complication lecture and portal hypertension discussion to understand this better. The key of this MCQ was that the child had undergone a procedure where umbilical vein catheterization was done, and therefore the catheter is a foreign body in the vein, so that can trigger a thrombus formation. The next question talks about this child, 12 kgs. The urine output is only 0.5 ml per kg per hour for 12 hours, and the serum creatinine is showing a doubling. What is the stage of AKI by KDIGO criteria? My request to you would be to kindly go through the app in the acute kidney injury section. There are 3 stages. Please don't mix with CKD. In CKD, it is GFR, no, 90, then 60 to 89, then 30 to 59, then 50 to 29, then less than 15. So we are not talking about CKD, we're talking about AKI. And how to remember it? CKD stage 2 is where there's doubling of serum creatinine. AKI stage 2 is where there's doubling of serum creatinine. AKI stage 3 is where there's 3 times tripling of creatinine. Normal urine output is how much? 1 ml per kg per hour. If it decreases to 0.5 ml per kg per hour for 6 hours, then it is going to be stage 1. If you are having for 12 hours, then you call it stage 2. And if it's 0.3, see 3 coming up again and again, 3 times 0.3, and for 24 hours it is stage 3. So go through the AKI section where I've discussed it, and well, in this question you can very well work out the urine output is half of normal. 1 ml per kg per hour is normal. This is 0.5 ml per kg per hour for last 12 hours with doubling of serum creatinine. So you can see from the table that the correct diagnosis of this person would be a stage 2 of AKI. And anyway, for CKD guys, it is not a stage. No, in CKD it is grading. In chronic kidney disease, we basically have is a grading, and in acute kidney injury, what we have is a staging. So if you can go through this table, it's simple. 6, 12, 24, 0.5, 0.5, 0.3, and 1.5, 2, and 3. Just get the numbers right now. I mean, right now, if you just try to get a mental image of this now, you can work out this question. Moving to the next one, I mean, this question has been distorted a lot, guys. This question is talking about a girl with honey crust lesions on the face, which was diagnosed by the pediatrician as impetigo. So he's already told you impetigo, or even if he did not write the word impetigo, honey crust lesions is impetigo. She has now been brought with facial puffiness and is not eating well. So there were 2 questions. One was a pediatric question of acrodermatitis enterohepatica, right? This question is having a girl who's having impetigo, and impetigo is caused by streptococcus, no? It is caused by streptococcus, and once streptococcus will contribute to this, then there could be post streptococcal involvement, that is post streptococcal glomerulonephritis, because this girl will be having RBCs in the urine. And how did I know that it is RBCs in the urine? Because she's having facial puffiness, she's not eating well. So what are the reasons for why a person would be having swelling on the face? Either the heart is swelling, or the liver is not working, or the kidneys are not working. When any person comes to you with puffy face, either it could be allergic reaction to food, nothing like that given it. It could be heart failing, no heart failure findings. It could be liver failing because albumin will become lesser, so there could be puffiness. If there is no heart issues, there are no liver issues, it has to be the kidney. So this patient is actually having post streptococcal glomerulonephritis, which will contribute to hematuria. So pretty a straightforward one. This is a classic case of PSGN, guys. You can go through the app section. I've described this very thoroughly. You can see impetigo will present after 2 weeks, and that was the history. That this girl has been brought after 2 weeks. She has not been feeling well initially after impetigo episode, and there is a hematuria manifestation. So the clinical presentation is that of PSGN. Coming to the next one, has a physiology overlap. The question talks about a person who's having microalbuminuria. The question said, what is the site of reabsorption of proteins? Now, most guys mark that as podocytes. See, guys, podocytes are for regulation. They stop proteins. Here he's not talking about what will stop the proteins, he's talking about what will reabsorb the proteins in the ultrafiltrate. So the answer for this would be proximal convoluted tubule. So please remember, podocytes are stopping proteins, not reabsorbing the proteins. What is going to reabsorb the proteins? It is PCT, it is proximal convoluted tubule. The correct answer to this is beta. These are a couple of questions that I have gathered at the moment and I have just discussed with you. There are more detailed discussions that would be following up in the app and also on our YouTube channel. So continue listening. And guys, as far as the paper is concerned, I agree it's a difficult one, but then we have to, taking it on the chin, as they say in cricket. I mean, if somebody bowls a bouncer to me, I will not chicken out and say that, oh, you bowled me a bouncer, I'll hit him for six. I mean, a guy sitting here can relate to me better. All of you have played cricket. If somebody tries to be aggressive with you, what will you do? Either answer with aggression or back out. So here, what I'm saying is mentally be aggressive. Focus on the parts which I've highlighted before, and I'm very sure that as you keep on learning, it becomes a habit. I began the discussion by saying knowledge is power. I'm ending by saying knowledge is power, guys. I mean, it's all about what you have here. No, the gray matter. That's what people are going to respect you for. So keep hammering, keep putting in all your efforts, and I'll definitely see you on the other side. That is the side of victory. Thank you so much for hearing me out.